Collapse is not the absence of God, it is the evidence of His transformation at work. We tend to think that when things fall apart, when the ground underneath us gives way, that somehow God has left the room, that we must have done something wrong, that we missed a sign, ignored a whisper, or made a decision so damaging that the presence of the divine recoiled and left us to sit in the wreckage. But that's not truth. That's fear, dressed in shame and speaking in the voice of unworthiness. There is something sacred about the collapse, something holy in the unraveling. It strips us of illusions of safety built on false foundations, of identities rooted in people-pleasing, of structures that were always too fragile to hold who we were becoming. Collapse reveals, it removes, it confronts, and yes, it hurts deeply. But pain is not always punishment. Sometimes pain is the passageway. We are not conditioned to trust collapse. We're conditioned to fear it, to see endings as failures, to associate loss with unworthiness, to run, fix, numb, or over-defunction in the face of disruption. We've been told by the world that strength is in keeping things together. But the truth is, there is strength in surrender. In letting go of what no longer serves. In watching the tower fall. In whispering through the tears, "Even here, I trust you." What if the collapse you're experiencing isn't the end of the story, but the clearing of the page? God does not orchestrate chaos, but He uses it. He doesn't abandon us to the breaking. He meets us in it. And it is there, in the rubble, where we begin to see not what we've lost, but what we never really had to begin with. False security, unreciprocated love, performative belonging, hollow success. When those things collapse, it is not a divine punishment, it is a divine mercy. The truth is, what collapses was never meant to last. And what survives the collapse? That's what's real. That's what's sacred. That's what's worthy of building again. There's something about the way God works in the silence. When the noise fades and all the external validation falls away, when the plans you clung to with white knuckles dissolve, and all you're left with is the quiet, God is there, whispering, guiding, not shouting answers, but gently unveiling your own soul to you. We keep asking, why is this happening? But maybe the better question is, what is this making possible? Because every collapse comes with an invitation to go deeper, to grow roots instead of chasing surface, to build resilience not through performance but through presence, to come home to yourself, not the version the world demanded, but the true, sacred, whole you. There is nothing glamorous about collapse. It's messy. It's raw. It doesn't come with clean edges or tidy timelines. But healing rarely does. Transformation rarely does. Growth almost never does. You think about a seed buried beneath the soil. It must break to sprout. Its shell must rupture in darkness before it ever reaches the light. That rupture is sacred. That breaking is holy. That collapse is life beginning again in disguise. Some of you have been through relational collapse. Love you thought would last forever walked away or betrayed you, or just slowly died in the silent spaces where connection used to live. And you've asked God, why would you let this happen? But maybe God didn't let love die. Maybe He allowed illusions to be removed so that true, anchored, whole love could find its way to you. Others have faith collapse in their careers, their finances, their identities. You built something, invested everything, time, energy, sacrifice, and it didn't hold. It fell. And now you question your value. But your value was never in the structure. It was in the soul that built it. You are not what you lost. You are who survived it. We like to skip the wilderness, but the wilderness is often where the voice of God is loudest. Not because God is louder, but because the world is quieter. We listen differently when we are desperate. We pay attention in the silence. We look for meaning not in the noise of applause, but in the rhythm of grace that beats quietly beneath our pain. Collapse is often mistaken for punishment, but what if it's preservation? What if God allowed things to fall apart so that you wouldn't build your life around what could never sustain it? What if it's protection disguised as disappointment? The Israelites walked through the wilderness for 40 years, not because they were forgotten, but because they were being formed. Because God wasn't just taking them out of slavery, He was taking the slavery out of them. And that kind of transformation doesn't happen in a hurry. It happens in the desert, in the waiting, in the collapsing of old identities and the birth of new ones. Maybe you're in a season where you feel like everything around you is falling apart, but could it be, just maybe, that everything around you is falling into place? What if you are not being broken down, you are being broken open? We don't often realize how much of ourselves we've buried under expectations, perfectionism, comparison, and fear. Collapse shakes those foundations. It forces us to see. And once you see, you cannot unsee. You cannot return to what you now know was never right for you. That's the discomfort of awakening. But it's also the gift. This is the paradox of faith. We often find it most fiercely, not when things make sense, but when everything falls apart, when clarity is gone, and all you have is trust. When the path is covered in fog, and the only way forward is one trembling step at a time. God does His deepest work in hidden places, in the spaces where no one applauds, no one sees, and no one understands. He transforms in silence. He rebuilds in stillness. And while the world may think you've lost everything, heaven knows you're gaining what truly matters. The collapse is not evidence that God has abandoned you. It is proof that He is rearranging the story, that He is removing what cannot stay, so that what is meant to be can arrive. And that process is rarely pain-free, but it is always purposeful. We must stop measuring God's presence by how comfortable or convenient our lives are. The absence of ease is not the absence of love. In fact, it's often in the hardest seasons where we experience the deepest encounters with God. When all our strength runs out, we find out we were never meant to carry it all alone in the first place. So if you're standing in the middle of collapse today, if the roof has caved in on your expectations and the walls of your certainty are crumbling, pause, take a breath, and know this: you are not being destroyed, you are being delivered. Let it fall. Let what cannot hold you go. Let the illusions collapse so the truth can stand. You don't have to fear this season. You have to feel it. Yes, you have to walk through it, grieve it, wrestle with it. But you do not have to fear it, because you are not walking alone. God is not on the other side of your breakthrough waiting for you to figure it out. He is in the breakdown, sitting with you in the dust, holding the broken pieces and whispering, even now I am making all things new. Don't rush to rebuild. Don't numb the pain or cover the cracks. Let the collapse do its work. Let it cleanse, let it clarify. Let it call you back to who you really are. You were never meant to live in structures built on shame. You were created for freedom, for authenticity, for wholeness, and sometimes the only way to get there is to let everything else fall. The collapse is not final, it is not fatal, it is not the end of your story, it is the turning point. So gather the lessons, tend to your wounds. Give yourself grace in the healing. And when you're ready, when your soul says yes, you will rise. Not as who you were before, but as who you were always meant to be. This is not the end, it's the unveiling. Let it collapse. And let God rebuild you from the inside out. Because what is rebuilt in truth will stand through every storm. And this time, it won't fall. Disruption is sacred ground for rebuilding a life rooted in truth, not fear. We may not recognize it in the moment. It rarely feels sacred when it first arrives. Disruption tends to come masked in loss, confusion, heartbreak, chaos. It enters without warning, often uninvited. And yet it has a way of shaking loose everything we thought we needed, everything we were so certain we couldn't live without. And what's left? What remains after the shaking? That's where the truth begins. It is human nature to cling to the familiar, even when the familiar is painful, even when the familiar costs us our peace, our growth, our self-respect. We stay in roles that suffocate us, relationships that diminish us, systems that use us because they're known, predictable, safe in the way a cage is safe. And then something happens. The job is lost, the friend disappears, the relationship crumbles, the identity you built yourself on begins to fracture, and you are left standing in the wreckage, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. But what if that wreckage is not your undoing? What if it's the beginning of your becoming? There is something incredibly powerful about disruption. Not because it feels good. It doesn't. It rips the floor out from beneath your feet. It demands your attention. It demands your honesty. But precisely because of that, it makes space for truth to rise. Real truth. Not the version we perform for others, not the mask we wear to be accepted, but the truth of who we are when everything superficial is stripped away. Disruption brings us face to face with what we've been avoiding. It brings our coping mechanisms into the light. It forces us to ask deeper questions. Who am I without that title, that relationship, that approval, that plan? What was I building my life upon, and was it strong enough to hold me? And when the answer is no, when the foundation proves fragile, disruption doesn't come to shame you. It comes to invite you, to realign you, to rebuild you. Fear will try to tell you that your world is ending, that you are lost, that there is no way forward. But truth has a quieter voice. Truth whispers, this is not the end. This is the clearing. This is the sacred space where you begin again, this time from a place of authenticity, not performance. This time from a place of worthiness, not proving. We live in a culture that glorifies certainty, control, perfection, but disruption tears holes in those illusions. It reminds us that control was always a myth, that certainty was always temporary, that perfection was always a prison. And when those illusions fall, we have a choice to make. Will we rebuild from fear, trying to recreate what once was, desperate to regain control, or will we rebuild from truth? Truth is not always comfortable, but it is liberating. It sets you free from the roles you were never meant to play, from the expectations that wore you down, from the lies that told you your value was tied to your productivity, your appearance, your ability to please. Truth says you are already enough, even in the mess. Some of the most powerful transformations happen not in the planned, polished seasons of life, but in the broken, undone moments where we have no choice but to pause, reflect, and confront. Moments where we can no longer distract ourselves with busyness, where we are stripped of noise and all that remains is who we really are. Disruption does not come to destroy you, it comes to rescue you from what you've outgrown, from what no longer honors your soul, from what may have served you once, but is now limiting your expansion. That may be a belief system, a way of thinking, a relationship dynamic, a career path, or even a version of yourself that's become too small for who you are becoming. And the beautiful thing about rebuilding from disruption is that you get to choose differently. You get to slow down, to ask, what do I truly want to carry with me? What values will define this next chapter? Where do I want to invest my energy? Not out of obligation, but out of alignment. This kind of rebuilding isn't about constructing a bigger, better version of what you had before. It's about grounding yourself in what is real, what is lasting, what is true. It's about letting go of hustle as a measure of worth, letting go of relationships rooted in codependency, letting go of systems that reward burnout over boundaries. Fear will try to lure you back to what's comfortable. But truth will invite you forward into what's meaningful, into what brings peace, even if it requires solitude, into what brings joy, even if it doesn't make sense to others, into what brings alignment, even if it asks you to walk alone for a while. And that right there is part of the sacred work of disruption. It teaches you how to walk with yourself, how to befriend your own soul, how to anchor your worth in something deeper than outcomes or opinions. When the noise is stripped away and the distractions are gone, you learn what it means to show up for yourself with honesty, compassion, and courage. There is a kind of freedom that only comes on the other side of disruption, not the surface level freedom of doing whatever you want, but the deeper freedom of knowing who you are, of standing in your truth even when it's inconvenient, of refusing to perform for love and instead receiving it from those who see the real you. When you rebuild your life from truth, your relationships change, your boundaries change, your goals change. You stop living to be impressive and start living to be intentional. You stop chasing validation and start cultivating purpose. You stop living by default and start living by design. Disruption will always come with grief. There is no way to avoid that. You will grieve what you thought would last. You will grieve the stories you told yourself. You will grieve versions of yourself you've outgrown. But grief is not the enemy. It's the bridge between what was and what will be. Let yourself walk that bridge with gentleness. Let yourself feel it all. The sadness, the fear, the anger. Let the tears water the soil of who you are becoming. Because the new life you're building, it needs those tears. It needs that grief. It needs your raw, unfiltered humanity. Not the curated version, not the Instagram will believe version, the real version, the one that doesn't have it all figured out but shows up anyway. The one that says, I may be broken open, but I'm still here. I may not have answers, but I still have faith. Disruption is not just the end of what no longer fits. It is the beginning of something more honest, more grounded, more alive. And you don't have to rush the rebuilding. In fact, please don't. Let it be slow. Let it be sacred. Let it be guided by the quiet wisdom within you, not the pressure of the world outside you. Some of the most beautiful things grow slowly. Oaks don't sprout overnight. Depth takes time. And healing is not linear. You will have days when you feel strong and clear, and you will have days when you feel lost again. That's not failure. That's the rhythm of transformation. Keep going. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are right on time for your own unfolding. Let this disruption be the moment you choose to stop building from fear. Let this be the season you stop chasing approval and start cultivating peace. Let this be the invitation to rebuild a life that feels like home, not just to others, but to your own soul. You are allowed to start again. You are allowed to walk away from what hurts, what drains, what diminishes. You are allowed to listen to your gut, your intuition, your inner voice, even when it contradicts what others expect of you. And you are allowed to take your time, to do it differently, to choose love over fear, integrity over image, presence over performance. Because the truth is, disruption is not the enemy. Fear is. Disconnection is. Pretending is. Disruption, when embraced, becomes a holy invitation. An altar where we meet ourselves honestly. A mirror that reflects what's real. A fire that burns away what's false. So bless the mess, bless the questions, bless the falling apart, because this is where new life begins, not in the certainty, but in the courage to keep going without it. Let your rebuilding be intentional. Let it be rooted in your values, not your wounds. Let it reflect who you are, not who you think you're supposed to be. Because when you rebuild from truth, you don't just create a life that looks good, you create a life that feels good, that feels whole, that feels aligned, that feels sustainable. And in that kind of life, disruption no longer becomes something to fear, it becomes something you respect, something you learn from, something that reminds you you are still growing, you are still becoming, and you are still deeply divinely held, even in the falling apart. Let it disrupt, let it reveal, let it rebuild. Survival is only the beginning. It is the first breath after the storm. It is the moment your knees stop buckling from the weight of what tried to break you. It is the shaking breath in the dark, the whisper of "I made it" when your world has fallen apart and you're still here. But transformation, that's the deeper story. That's the soul work. That's the quiet revolution that begins inside of you after the crisis has passed. We tend to glorify survival. We applaud people for enduring hardship, for holding on, for pushing through. And yes, there is strength in that. There is dignity in not giving up. But survival without healing can become a trap. You can stay stuck in the mentality of just getting by, always alert, always guarded, always in protection mode, never allowing yourself to evolve into who you're actually meant to become. Transformation is what happens when you stop asking, how do I stay alive in this, and begin asking, how do I become more alive because of this? It's what begins when you allow the pain to teach you, not just torment you. It's what unfolds when you stop rehearsing the wound and start rewriting the narrative, not erasing the story, but reclaiming your voice inside of it. Taking back your power, not just to tell what happened, but to reveal what it created inside of you, who you became because of it. There's something sacred about the moment when you realize that surviving was never the goal. Becoming whole was. You didn't go through the fire just to say you got burned. You went through it so that something within you could be refined, strengthened, clarified, transformed. When we look at someone who's survived pain, heartbreak, betrayal, loss, trauma, it's easy to see them as a warrior simply because they're still standing. But true strength isn't just in the standing, it's in how you choose to walk from there. Do you carry bitterness or wisdom? Do you shut down or open deeper? Do you numb or heal? Survival keeps you breathing. Transformation teaches you how to breathe freely again. Survival gets you through the night. Transformation helps you walk in the light. Survival can make you cautious. Transformation makes you courageous. And that's what people need to see. That's what becomes the real testimony. Not that you endured, but that you evolved. Not that you stayed silent to avoid conflict, but that you found your voice and used it with integrity. Not that you avoided your emotions to appear strong, but that you sat in the discomfort and chose to feel it anyway. You don't inspire people just by saying, I went through hell. You inspire them when you say, hell didn't get the last word. Transformation is not loud. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it begins quietly in the privacy of your own soul. A decision to choose peace instead of drama. A choice to walk away instead of retaliate. A moment when you speak truth instead of playing small. A quiet refusal to be defined by what hurt you. That's when the real healing begins. And transformation isn't always beautiful at first. In fact, it can feel like falling apart all over again. Because when you decide to stop surviving and start healing, everything that's been suppressed starts rising to the surface. The anger, the grief, the fear, the numbness. It can feel overwhelming. It can feel like too much. But that's the excavation process. You cannot rebuild until you clear out the wreckage. You cannot move forward while pretending nothing happened. You cannot transform while clinging to who you were in your survival mode. Survival tells you to hide the wounds. Transformation invites you to clean them, tend to them, learn from them. And that takes bravery. It takes bravery to say, I've had enough of just making it. I want more. I want joy. I want freedom. I want truth. I want relationships that nourish me, not drain me. I want to stop shrinking, to fit into places that no longer honor who I'm becoming. It takes bravery to lay down your armor and pick up your authenticity. And the most incredible part, you don't have to earn your transformation. You don't have to deserve it. It is your birthright. You were made to evolve. You were created to become. You were never meant to stay frozen in the moment that broke you. You were meant to rise, to unfold, to bloom into a deeper version of yourself. But that version can't emerge while you're stuck in survival mode. Survival says, I can't trust anyone. Transformation says, I will learn how to trust myself again. Survival says, I have to be perfect to be loved. Transformation says, I am worthy even in process. Survival says, I'm broken. Transformation says, I'm healing. And when you begin to walk in that truth, something extraordinary happens. You stop settling for relationships that mirror your trauma. You stop living in fear of rejection. You stop chasing validation. You begin creating a life that feels aligned, not just acceptable. You begin honoring your emotions instead of hiding them. You begin making decisions based on your values, not your fears. You begin to feel like yourself again. Not the version others shaped for their comfort, but the real, wild, sacred you. That's the power of transformation. It doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. It takes what was meant to destroy you and uses it to rebuild something stronger, softer, wiser, freer. And no one can do that work for you. People can support you, love you, encourage you, but the transformation belongs to you. It's a deeply personal journey. It requires honesty, patience, and grace. It requires confronting parts of yourself you've ignored. It asks you to question the stories you've believed about who you are and what you deserve. And yes, it will challenge everything that kept you stuck, but it will also set you free. Free from the guilt that was never yours to carry. Free from the need to explain your pain. Free from the shame that kept you silent. Free from the patterns that stole your peace. And when you reach that kind of freedom, survival isn't your identity anymore. It's just the beginning of your story, the part where the old self cracked open to make room for the real you. So if you're still breathing, but you feel like you're just existing, this is your invitation, not to push harder, not to pretend more convincingly, but to begin the real work. The sacred work of transforming. Ask yourself, what am I clinging to that no longer serves me? What beliefs, habits, or relationships are rooted in survival, not truth? Where have I abandoned myself to be accepted by others? What would it look like to come home to myself? Let those questions guide you, not to shame, but to awareness. Awareness is the first light in the dark. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice the cracks in the foundation, the places where you've been people-pleasing, the ways you stayed small, the lies you've agreed to. But instead of spiraling into regret, you rise into responsibility. You say no more. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. You begin the work of becoming, of healing, of choosing again and again to walk in your truth. And every time you do, you move further away from mere survival and deeper into transformation. You begin to trust that your scars are not shameful, they are sacred. You begin to speak your truth, not to be heard, but to be free. You begin to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You begin to rest, not because everything is finished, but because your soul deserves softness too. And you begin to love yourself, not in spite of the wounds, but because of who you became through them. Is it the testimony? Not that you lived, but that you lived well. Not that you endured, but that you emerged. Not that you kept going, but that you grew. Let your life tell that story. Let your boundaries speak of your healing. Let your joy reflect your courage. Let your presence radiate your wholeness. You are not just a survivor. You are a living, breathing testament to what's possible when you choose truth over fear, love over armor, transformation over trauma. You are still becoming, and that becoming is the real victory.